remarks. You each can take 2 minutes to introduce yourselves to the members and tell a little bit about what made you decide to step up and run and what you hope to accomplish if you are elected. You can start with Lois, I guess, and just go down the line.
Hi everybody, my name is Lois Schipper. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you tonight. I've lived in White Center in West Seattle for the last 25 years, delivered both my kids while living in White Center in West Seattle, and they went to school at both Seattle Public Schools and the Highline School District. They're both off on their college and graduate school careers right now, but I'm proud to say I was a PTA president in both the Seattle School District and the Highline District, and went to Olympia as the PTA legislative chair. In my work life, I'm a registered nurse. I'm a maternal and child health nurse expert, and I'm working right now at Seattle Children's Hospital in the Center for Diversity and Health Equity. I work with a team that supports refugee and immigrant families who are newly arrived, who have children that have very serious health conditions, to help them understand the healthcare system, navigate children's, and navigate in the community. I've been a member of the 34th for about 10 years, have also been a PCO in my White Center neighborhood for the same amount of time, and I was the diversity chair on the immediate past executive board. I want to go to Olympia and represent you because I think we need to do more work on gun control. I think we need to ban assault weapons. We need to have safer storage regulations. We need to make sure that we hold gun owners accountable for securing their guns. I think we've gotten a start on K-12 education funding, but we are by no means there yet. We need to look for better funding for special ed. We need to decrease the gap between lower income students and higher income students, and we need to support our students and educators with every resource we can to make them successful. I would love to go to Olympia and work on behalf of children and families for you. I also think our tax code in Washington State is the most progressive in the nation, and we need to do something about that upside down code. Thanks.
Good evening, I'm Sofia Aragon. I'm another candidate for the 34th District for the Senate seats, hoping to fill the really large shoes of Shannon Braddock. I've been a resident of this district for 5 years. I actually spent 3 years in the Luna Park neighborhood. And when my husband and I decided that we needed to buy a home for a family, we were looking for a larger property. We were living in a townhouse. And 2 years later, after being bid and outbid by several homes, we did find a house in Burien, which we were very surprised to find a very lovely home and that we're happy to have today. So I've had this experience, and we didn't think we would be one of those families that would be challenged to find that home that suited us. So in terms of the 34th, I've been a member since I've lived here in the 34th. We had a wonderful PCO, so I did not run against that person. However, I became a PCO when I moved in Burien. Just so you know, I did caucus for Bernie Sanders, but I was proudly wore my pantsuit when Hillary was on the ballot. In terms of what I would like to bring to the 34th, I've spent over a dozen years in Olympia. I was the Governmental Affairs Director for the Washington State Nurses Association. I also train nurses how to be political advocates. We have one of the largest lobbying groups in Olympia, and we helped pass Affordable Care Act here in the state of Washington. We made sure that undocumented children had adequate health insurance, and we also fought against higher education cuts. There as a lobbyist, I was also a founder of the Racial Equity Lobbying Team, and what we did was fight against discriminatory legislation. And so what I would like to do as a legislator is make sure that everyone has the opportunity in Washington, and also what's clearly dear to my heart too is affordable housing. Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Lem Charleston. I live here in the 34th, and I've been living in the 34th for about 21 years. I was born here in Seattle, raised on Beacon Hill. I'm a former United States Marine. I served my country. I'm also a minister. I pastored in the Seattle area from 1992 to 2008. I'm also an IAM machinist. I was a union steward for 20 years, and today we celebrated my 30th anniversary of Boeing. I've been there for 30 years. Time flies when things are crazy, so it was a blessing to be able to be here that far. I have 2 children. both attend schools here in West Seattle. They both attended Alki and Madison, and my oldest is now in high school. He knows everything, but I love it still, how that goes. In my professional life, I worked at Boeing, and I worked with the FAA, and we make sure that the airplane's built safe and for everything, so that you guys don't ever have to worry about how this thing goes. The reason I ended up running, because I went down and was lobbying a bill, fighting Tim Eyman and John Carlson to get this bill overturned. And I went down and met the wonderful Sharon Nelson, our incredible senator. And one of the things she told me, she said, we can't get this done this year, so come back next year. So if you want your help, I would like to come back this year. But I'd like to come back and work for this district to make schools more fair, to get this three-legged tax system squared away, because it only benefits the rich and it cripples and handicaps the poor. And that's something that this state cannot continue to sustain and be a livable place for everyone to grow up. I would like my children to be able to go to college and be able to buy a home in this district, because, you know, as much rain as we get, Seattle is absolutely gorgeous. It's a beautiful place to live. It's a wonderful, safe place to live. So again, I'd like to get your vote. I'd like you guys to vote for me, and I would love to support you, because I'd like to fulfill my promise to Sharon and go back next year. Thank you.
Can I break the rules and stand up? I move too much when I talk. Okay. Hi, I'm Shannon Braddock. I'm proud to be here tonight running for the state senate for the 34th district. To steal one of my daughter's favorite words, I am exhilarated by what we as Democrats have been able to get done together, even given what is happening at the national level. This region, this district, and this state are still able to protect our progressive values and ideals and pass really great pieces of legislation. And I think this session, seeing what happened when we were in the majority, really demonstrated what could get done. And I do want to thank our retiring State Senator Sharon Nelson for her amazing and effective leadership, and the rest of our delegation. They have really represented the 34th well, and I want to step in and do the same on your behalf and with you. So I have been a resident of this district for almost 20 years. I've been a member of this organization for about 10 years. I've had private sector experience. I've had experience working at the congressional level, at the state level. I volunteered in our community with the PTAs, most recently with Westside Baby and with the West Seattle Food Bank. And I have worked with some of your elected officials, King County Council Chair Joe McDermott, and most recently our County Executive, Dow Constantine. So I've been working with constituents of the 34th District for about 8 years, and I'm really proud of a lot of the work that we have done. I am a working single mom with 3 kids. The progressive values and ideals of this organization and of Democrats are more important to me now than ever, and we still have so much work to do. We have the most regressive tax system in the nation. We are still pushing for universal health care. We have got to address issues of gun violence, just to name a few of those items, because I see now I have 3 seconds left. But it would be my pleasure, and I would be so proud to go to the state senate to effectively represent all of you working on issues on behalf of this district. Thank you.
Hey, I am Nguyen. My family actually came to America as refugees on a boat from Vietnam. I was born here in White Center, raised in Nguyen, and we currently live in West Seattle now. We came over here because of good policy. So because of public housing in White Center, we were able to live there. And because of good policy, we were able to thrive here as well. I grew up on a mattress in our basement because our house was too crowded. I was a janitor at my high school because I was too young to get another job. So I understand the difficulties that a lot of the folks feel in this district specifically. Currently, I'm a senior manager at Microsoft. I build job training resources for folks who are interested in tech. I'm also very engaged in the community on issues around family homelessness, affordable housing, and early learning. Specifically, we actually passed legislation this past year supporting kids who experience adverse childhood experiences. I graduated from Seattle University with 2 degrees, and I was a 2-term student body president while I was there as well. But most important, I'm a father of 2 young kids and a husband to a wonderful wife named Tally. And I care about my family, and I care about yours as well, especially here in the 34th. I represent a new generation of leadership that cares about fully funding our education and providing teachers with the support they need in order to close that achievement gap that some other folks have mentioned as well. I believe that income inequality is one of the greatest threats to our democracy, and that this economic prosperity that we have should be shared with everybody else as well. And that's why I want to run for the Senate, is because our representation matters. If elected, I would be the first person of color from the 34th to be in the legislature. I'd be the first person of Vietnamese descent to hold a state level office. But at the end of the day, I want to represent everybody here in the 34th. So thank you again for the time. I appreciate you all being here. And we'll have a good forum.
All right, so the first set of questions are around experience and qualifications. And Joe, we'll start with you and go the other direction back across the panel here. Please tell us about your experience and or ideas about being effective in the legislative process.
You know, it's interesting. So I've been told that I'm maybe a little younger. I'm old enough to realize that things aren't working, but I'm young enough to believe that I can still fix it. So a lot of the work that we're doing right now in terms of family homelessness and affordable housing and mass transit, I think requires bold, visionary leadership who, aren't beholden to any corporate interests or any other interests. We just want to be doing what's right for the people in the 34th. Specifically, I'm the associate board chair at a nonprofit called Wellspring Family Services, one of the oldest in Washington State at 125 years old. I do a lot of work on police accountability, met with the new sheriff's administration to work with her on how to bridge gaps and provide unity between law enforcement and community. We're very active in the West Seattle community as well on other things in terms of providing a community for folks in this area. So in terms of the legislative experience as well, we've helped pass legislation this past cycle, partnering with folks like our great representatives, Sharon Nelson, Joe Fitzgibbons, and Alan Cody as well. Is that too long?
Thank you.
That's all you have to say.
That's actually right. It should be 1 minute.
Oh, yeah. Okay, 1 minute.
Shannon, please
I
tell
love
us
your
about your
overtime.
experience and or ideas about being effective in the legislative process.
All right, thank you. As I just shared when I was introducing myself, I have been working for elected officials who represent the 34th District in some capacity for about 8 years. I've also been engaged, I too was a legislative chair, my PTA, which was actually a really interesting job to go to Olympia and fight on behalf of education and really to see what it means to be a citizen showing up there and what that, when you're a resident, if you just show up and you don't quite know how the system works, how important it is to know how the system works so that you can actually get things done. So in my job at the King County Council, we have it's technically nonpartisan, but we do have 3 Republicans on the body that I work for and 6 Democrats. And so I spend a whole lot of time working on behalf of the executive's agenda, making sure we get the votes that we need to get legislation passed. And that's about building relationships, understanding the issues, opening the doors, hearing what people have to say, not always talking, and then figuring out the most effective way to get to the goal at the end of the day. And I have had a vast amount of experience really making those things happen and being effective at making those things happen in my day job, and I would love to do it for you in the 34th.
Thank you. Lem, you're next. Please tell us about your experience and or ideas about being effective in the legislative process.
My experience goes back to my roots as a minister for quite a few years. We get to engage with the homeless, we get to engage with the underprivileged, the disenfranchised. I also work as an associate chaplain for the Seattle Police Department, and we get to see things that I hope none of you ever have to see. I'm the vice president for that organization, and I've been there for about 12 years. And I'd like to see everybody get more than just a fair shake. I'd like to, if we can get rid of homelessness, that would be absolutely fantastic. That's going to take a lot of work and a lot of people and a lot of time. As for my experiences with it, I've been down to Olympia. Of course, this last time, a couple of times, I took my wife and my kid down, and we finally got to talk to the senator, which was a wonderful experience for all of us. Hope you never forget it. I've gone down to Olympia with my union to lobby for different things that the IAM machinists need. We've gone on strike to fight for what we really needed, and so sacrifice for what you need is something you have to do. Sometimes it's not always comfortable, sometimes it's not always fun, and it's most definitely never easy. But I'd like you to take a look at what I've done and think about me as one of your candidates.
Thank you, Lem. Sophia, same question. I can repeat it if you'd like.
Oh, sure. I'm good. So I think that having spent 12 years in Olympia, first 5 years being a legislative manager for the state agency at the Department of Health, I really started my career working really hard in controversial issues at the department. We had family planning, we had caring for HIV individuals, and also at the legislature, I spent 5 years with the Nurses Association advocating for health reform adoption in the state. We also took on really hard issues like revenue for our growing state as well. And I feel like I've really seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. When I first stepped into Olympia as an advocate, we had a supermajority. I didn't even have to talk to a Republican to get something passed. And then over time, I saw our majority sort of fissure and fracture, and then finally go into a minority in the Senate. So I feel like I'm going in with my eyes wide open. And also as an executive director of an organization that's here to solve the nursing shortage, I do understand where businesses may be struggling in terms of recruiting, in terms of revenue, but it doesn't have to be an either or. We can achieve goals that businesses can profit as well as our communities.
Do you need me to repeat the question? Or okay.
So I'm going to tell you a little story about why I'm interested in running for the legislature. Before I went to Children's Hospital, I was a public health nurse and program manager at Seattle-King County Public Health for 25 years, doing home visits, working with families, working with the child welfare system. And legislators would come to us in the summer and they would say to us, tell us what's working, tell us what's not working, and you tell us what we can do to help you do a better job serving families, children, and citizens in your district. And we would tell folks, including Eileen, Joe, Sharon, Ruth Kage's been a champion for children and families up in the 32nd district for years. And they would take those ideas and asks back to Olympia, craft bills, shepherd them through, and pass them. And we would see programs, services, and funding. And we were able to do a better job supporting those children and families that we were serving, providing health care. I feel like I want to go down to Olympia, and I want to do that for all of us in the 34th and in Washington State.
Thank you. Let's start with Sophia, and we can go that way and then come back to Lois. What is the most important trait you will bring to Olympia, which will make you a successful legislator?
I think the most important trait I have is, what I've said before, is sort of this really understanding the hard work it takes to be effective in Olympia. Seeing the good and bad and ugly, and I'll just say what I wasn't able to say in my last comments, is just not taking for granted all of the hard wins that we've had over the last few years. Because what I've also seen down in Olympia is really a diminishing of some of the rights that we've had for many years. For example, for workplace safety was something that I've seen, and you just think about, how did that happen? And so what I want to do is be able to hold ground as well as advance issues that are really important. I mean, I think a story to tell is that one of the reasons why I ran for office is I think about when my parents brought me here as a 3-year-old. They saw a clear path for opportunity. They can get jobs. There was a school I could go to, and they told me, you're going to go to the University of Washington and do really well. I'm not really sure that's there for people, even of middle income means, and that really worries me.
Lem?
Repeat the question.
Sure. What is the most important trait that you will bring to Olympia, which will make you a successful legislator?
One of the things I'm going to be able to take to Olympia is my experience, not just as working with something with STD, because people of color are on both sides of STD situations. In my experience as a United States Marine, seeing adversity about doing things that you didn't feel like doing, that you couldn't do, but you had to do. And I think that going down to Olympia is something that we have to do. I have 2 small boys, or young boys, and I'd like them to be able to grow up in a world that's supposed to be better than the one that I'm in right now. Not saying this is bad, but every society moves forward. What I've noticed in the past is the stagnation of the progresses and the gains that we've made in our lives and our generation. I was looking at a debate between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon in 1960, and the things that they were talking about are the things things that we're doing right now. We're suffering the same things. Not as bad, but we're still suffering them. I'd like to go to Olympia and change the way we're doing things right now so that in 25 years, our children can say that things came a long way since they ran a long time ago.
Shannon?
I think it's not a single trait, but it's my ability to listen, to hone in on what the ultimate goal is, and then to figure out where there's room in the margins so that we can get to a deal and get done the value that we really are working for in whatever piece of legislation we're working towards. And I think it's also to counter a little bit, Joe said he's still young enough to believe that government can do some great things. Well, I'm a little older, and I still believe it too. And I think that is one of the traits I bring to it as well, is being civically engaged and really believing in the fact that our government, working together with our communities and with organizations, really can, to use an old, move the ball forward. I've seen it happen, and sometimes it takes a long time. So it requires patience, it requires listening, and it requires an understanding of where you want to be at the end of the day. And I bring that to the table.
Thank you. Joe?
Yeah, a lot of it is, I think I have a lived experience in many of the communities in the 34th, some that go underrepresented oftentimes as well. So one of the strongest traits is being from various communities here, but also, maybe this is because I have 2 kids, I can run on about 5 hours of sleep per day for a long period of time. And also in my background, I do strategy and analytics for tech companies, and I love policy, and I love details, and I love kind of getting wonky with policy like that as well. So it's weird, but I do spend my free time reading policy and reading the budgets and whatnot as well. So I'm weird, I kind of dig it. Hopefully you guys do as well.
Lois?
I think what I would bring to Olympia is my on-the-ground experience here in the 34th and in King County, working in the community, implementing programs, looking at what works, studying evidence-based work and putting that to work, building teams across agencies. I think that's the kind of work you have to do in Olympia. You have to come in and know the issues. You have to know what works, study the data. What are we going to do about this? What have we seen work elsewhere? And then go out and help to bring together the other legislators in the House and Senate to understand that and to begin to work together to put those evidence-based and effective solutions in place. And we've been doing it in King County for children, women, and families, and public health. We've worked with lots of different agencies across the CPS, child welfare, schools, school-based clinics. So I think I have that experience about bringing people together to solve problems.
All right, now we'll move on to questions about issues. And the first group are about what your priorities are. Let's start with Lem this time and come this way, I guess. And the first question is, what are your top 2 issues and how will you address them in Olympia?
Top 2 issues that we have here, of course, is that related tax tier, the problem that we have, where corporations can get away with almost whatever they want, and then the taxes are left to the citizens and the poor to bear the brunt of. While they get their tax breaks and their tax incentives, our property taxes keep going up. We got taxes, the 3 taxes. We've got sugar tax, we've got sales tax, we've got property tax. We're the ones that build this community. We're the ones that live in this community. And it's great that corporations can come in and succeed, but it's imperative that they pay their fair share. There's nothing wrong with paying your fair share. We teach our children to be fair. We scold them when they're not. Corporations are no different. I like their success, but they should pay their fair share. And our school system, and not just because I have 2 little guys in school, but I like to be able to get the teachers. They're so underrated. They're so underappreciated. They fuel our future. They put these kids to work. They put their minds in a positive direction. I think they need the best and the most that they can get in order to do a very, very good job and have our kids go in the right direction.
Thank you. To Sofia, yes.
So my top 2 priorities, one has to do with, I'll just say, the concept of opportunity. And that really involves a lot of things. A strong educational system so that people can progress. Particularly in my work, when You know, our state is in a state of growth. We have 700,000 jobs coming in a very short amount of time. And 400,000 of those jobs are going to be here in the Puget Sound area. And it makes me sad when I hear colleagues in workforce development that they know that not everybody is going to benefit from that. Now, why is that? And that's a big disconnect. The other piece is we also need to just get real and talk about a revenue system that works for a growing state like ours. And I agree with everyone here on the table that what the system have is really upside down. For the people who have the least, they have the most tax burden. How can we equalize it so that everybody contributes their fair share to our growing economy?
Really hard to pick two. I have so many things I'm passionate about, but I will talk about guns first. There was a shooting in West Seattle last night, a fatality at a track meet. It was an older gentleman, I believe, an adult, but still shot to death in our community. We just had the recent killings in Burien, 13 and 17-year-old killed on the street, right at the street corner. I've been on child death review for King County for the last 20 years and heard too much about youth suicide and about kids being killed by guns. And so I think we need to out and out ban assault weapons. We have done that with machine guns back in the 80s. And the NRA supported it, so there's no reason we can't do it again. The other thing I'm really passionate about is K-12 education. I think we've gotten a start. We're not there yet. We need to do more. We need to do a lot more to close the achievement gap and support educators and students, differentiated instruction, different strategies that bring that gap closer together and give our educators the support they need.
I think a lot of what I want to do is associated with affordability. So when you look at affordable housing, mass transit has to also be in play as well, just because people are being displaced right now. We talked about a regressive tax structure that is existent right now in Washington State, which means we need to amend the Constitution to make that less regressive. We also need to look at other revenue sources to make it more progressive at the same time. And kind of coupling on that, education is important. My wife was a public educator in the Highland School District for 10 years. I went to Hazel Valley Elementary. I went to Cascade Middle School. Education can be the key to get folks out of the run, and I believe that is where we need to invest more, even beyond what we have for the McCleary Act, just because teachers are underfunded, they're understaffed, and they need more resources to succeed as well, which then would help close the achievement gap.
It really is a struggle to hone in on two, but I think we have to start with tax reform, because it impacts so many of these other issues that we all care about so deeply. I think realistically, we have to look at what can we do. I would definitely work on a capital gains tax. I would work hard to try to pass a capital gains tax. And we have an issue in this county where, again, thanks to Tim Hyman, we have not been able to keep up with our property tax issues with growth and with inflation, and it's really caused a huge gap in the revenues, again, adversely affecting services that we can provide for our public health clinics, for example. So I think tax reform, because of its impact on so many other things, is one of the top issues. Also, gun violence prevention. I have been named a candidate of distinction for Moms Demand Action. I have 3 kids. My son should not have to spend his school time walking out in support of gun violence prevention because people are not doing their jobs in protecting our kids and our families. So I would definitely support the initiative that will be coming forward from the Alliance for Gun Responsibility.
Thank you.
And it's going to be important to implement it.
Shannon, we'll start with you. The Chair of Appropriations tells you that he has an extra $100 million. What area of the budget would you spend it on?
That's cool. Well, for that one, so I really think in that case, really if it was $100 million unrestricted dollars, I would certainly look at our school system. I would look at McCleary. I would look at the pieces that we've not been able to accomplish yet and try to determine how much of that money. $100 million does sound like a whole lot of money, and it is, but unfortunately, even that is not enough to close the gaps for all of the things that we need. But in that case, if I had $100 million, I would probably really focus it on our education system, and not just K through 12. I would also look at our education and resources for the 0 to 5 group, as well as technical training and higher education.
Thank you. Joe.
That's a good question. So,
You
I
can
think
thank Eileen Cody for that.
nice.
Thanks.
Good to see representatives of Joe as well. Honestly, I think in terms of ROI for $100 million, knowing that we have a problem with supporting law enforcement to provide them the resources to have de-escalation training, I think in terms of ROI, would actually go a long way. So King County right now, they don't actually have dash cameras because they can't afford it, let alone body cameras. They just recently were able to get non-lethal weapons, less lethal weapons through Mitzi's administration. So there's a whole host of places to put it, but in terms of like moving the needle, I think giving our law enforcement more resources to have de-escalation training, have mental health services training, and being able to have non-lethal weapons and other avenues to support the community would be a good way to put it.
Thank you. We'll come down here to Lois.
It's another really hard question, thanks to those of you that suggested this question. I would probably put it towards early learning. I think we have evidence and we know that investing early and giving kids the best start we can in life returns far more value on investment. It solves some of the problems that we deal with when kids hit school unprepared. It gives them the support for mental and emotional health. We work with parents so that they have a nurturing relationship, and you see dramatic results. I work with the Nurse Family Partnership at Public Health. It's a program that supports first-time low-income moms. We saw incredible things. They turned around their lives as moms, and they turned around their kids' lives because they knew what to do to give them the best start in life, and that lasts you the rest of your life.
How I would spend $100 million, I think it's important as a legislator to also know this landscape of funding that you could actually knit together. So the short answer is I would invest it actually in affordable housing. We do have a crisis here in King County and Seattle, but I would make sure as a legislator, because not only do we have the ability to benefit the 34th, but we also need to work for statewide advancement. And one of the things I learned from the last federal election is that you can't leave out people in more rural communities, okay? Because they know, they feel that they're not being included. So back to the leveraging dollars, right now I'm working with the Healthcare Authority in this grant that actually came from the Affordable Care Act, looking at what are those other things that really determine someone's health. So quality of life and length of life have to be 50% of your socioeconomic factors and your physical environment. Both of those housing represents could really impact your life and health.
So Deb, you said $100 million for the 34th or for the whole state?
Your choice.
For the state.
Oh, all right. So $100 million is a lot of cash. It's excellent. It's a good question. It's a pretty easy question. As adults, we always teach young folks to invest in their future because that's going to give you a big bang. I would invest probably 70% of that $100 million in our kids because they're the ones that are going to decide what nursing home to put us in. I think I remember way back now what we did. I would take another 30% and I would do something about this property tax. You know, if you're going to have kids doing well in school, it's nice for them to have a nice place to live, a decent place to live, where their parents don't have to worry about it. We were looking at a film the other night, my sons and I, where people had to take their kids out of school in South America because they couldn't afford to send them to school. We don't want it to get that way here. We don't need it to get that way. This is a modern country. Up here we're a technologically advanced society, so it should be easy to decide to invest in your future. And I would advise that with anybody, at any time. If you have $100 million to play with, don't go buy a Lamborghini. Invest it.
If I have $100
We'll
million.
We'll start with Joe then and come down this way. The next question is about climate change.
Yeah.
These questions were ranked according to votes from members of the 34th, so they're not in any particular order aside from the interest that was expressed by members in hearing you answer them. According to a Yale University study, our district leads the entire country in awareness and concern about climate change. In 2016, I-732 was defeated. In 2018, the governor's carbon tax bill didn't make it out of committee. I-1631, if not passed, could be 3 strikes, you're out. What is your strategy to pass a comprehensive statewide measure to put a price on or otherwise regulate carbon pollution?
I think the reason why the other two didn't pass largely was because of the efforts it took. So 1631 is a concerted effort between a lot of organizations. And one of the things that they really focused on was making sure that the burden of the tax would not fall just on middle class and lower income families. So part of the funds from 1631, which is being an initiative, there's a sign back there, you can sign on to it, goes towards working with communities that are what's called pollution burdened. Some of them actually are included in the 34th district as well. We know that areas that have extra pollution, you have a higher rates of asthma, higher rates of healthcare risks. So when we talk about climate change, we don't just talk about climate change, we're talking about healthcare as well. Part of the funding for this also goes towards on credits for bus passes and also on-bill credits for low-income families as well. So the reason why this one I think is going to work and is impressive is because it actually did a good job trying to work with lower to middle-income families as well to make sure they weren't bearing the brunt.
Yes, certainly supporting 1631 is the step we need to be taking now. I think, as Joe was referring to, the health equity lens and providing resources to those communities that are impacted is, I believe, too, a big push that will help 1631 to pass. I also won't believe that it's 3 strikes and you're out. If it doesn't pass, I will continue working hard. We are very fortunate to have Joe Fitzgibbon in the delegation, who is a leader in this area, and we will certainly work closely together to try to continue to move and do the things we need to do for climate change, or to impact climate change. King County today just sued the oil companies for their impact on climate change. I've worked at King County, as I mentioned, for about 8 years. We are a leader in the region, really trying to work to do some of those small things as well as some of those bigger things to make a positive impact, and I would certainly bring that lens to the county. And I really will work hard to see 1631 pass, and would appreciate everyone's support here.
Well, just because 1631 went down twice, doesn't mean it has to go down 3 times. And if it does go down 3 times, this is the air we breathe. This is the water we drink. This is where we swim. This is where we play. You know, China has horrible pollution. They let it get out of control, and they're fighting an uphill battle. Knowing what we know, with the skills that we have, and the understanding that we have, and the legislator being this concerned about it, there's no need to struggle to pass clean air. I'm a diver by choice. I remember I chose some small tanks one time because I was lazy and I didn't want to take the full-size tank. And we went down about 60 feet and we always dove to a certain space and we came back. Well, this one time on the way back, I ran out of air. And I was 2 atmospheres down. It was because I made the wrong choice. I made the choice of being lazy instead of prudent. We don't need to make that wrong choice. Air is precious, especially when you don't have it. Trust me.
Well, the initiative system here in Washington is a unique one and very well used, as you know. But this is why it's important, if we want comprehensive climate change, to have a strong majority in the Senate, so that we have a party that values preventing, curbing, ending climate change, and we can actually get things done. In Olympia, I've had the fortunate experience to learn from some of my labor union partners who actually worked with industry and with their workers to figure out the way how to transition from polluting industries into clean energy. And that was something that took a really long time, but I'm grateful that I have some context there in Olympia that I can learn this lesson from. The other piece is that one of the things I also advocated for was to reduce toxins in the environment. And I know that these legislative debates can be very confusing, and I think so my experience knowing who's who and who says what and who is credible is going to be very important.
Thanks, that's an excellent question. I have a secret weapon in my back pocket. My youngest child is a junior at the UW in the first cohort of environmental engineering program, and I would count on him to tell me the best solutions to climate change, and he would feed me the most recent data. But I think the other important thing is, why hasn't this passed? What are the opposing legislators saying. I want to understand that, and I want to work to get data and solutions to bring them into the fold. I think we as Democrats support, measures to affect climate change. We support these bills. Why aren't other people supporting them? We need to get the evidence, get the data. There's my secret weapon, and you don't. And help to figure out how to address their concerns so that we can come together to pass this legislation and make a change.
Lois, you can hang on to the mic. The next set of questions are about taxes. I think the first two I don't think we need to ask because it's pretty clear from the comments that you all made already that we're not going to see any distinctions between you on those questions. So, the next one is, what solutions would you propose to address our state's regressive tax structure, and how important is this issue to you?
I think it's really important. I think the lower income families bear the burden of our regressive tax system. They pay 17% of their taxes, of their income in taxes, where the wealthiest only pay 2%. I'm going to say the words. I think we need to work towards something that gets us to a state income tax. The fact that we have to pass levies for Best Starts for Kids. They're great levies, don't get me wrong. Vet human services, Best Starts for Kids, transportation, street repair, all of that. Our funding system is broken. This isn't going to make people pay more in tax. What it's going to do is make it more fair and get steady income so that we aren't fighting every single year to figure out, what are we going to use the little bit that we have to fund this year. So I think we need to reform our entire system and look at income tax.
I completely agree as well. I think income tax would be much more fair and equitable than the system we have now. When I was in Olympia, I was a member of what's called the Revenue Coalition, which was a collection of organizations. We literally combed through the revenue code, thought about what solutions were, and some of the solutions that came out that we're still fighting for is the capital gains tax. But an income tax also really does need to be seriously looked at. The other piece is that, how important this is to me. It's about fairness. It's about people who, when we have, I'm really happy for people who come to the Northwest, they do their hard work, and are really successful. But it's who we are and what we have to offer businesses that contribute to that success. So to me, it's only fair that they contribute a piece of their profit and fortunes to support our communities.
Well, in all reality, we hear the word income tax and we think of the federal government. We think of the IRS. But when you have a state income tax, and if we can deploy a state income tax, it'll force our legislators to balance this unjust budget that crushes the poor and allows the rich to go scot-free. To have a property tax, a sales tax, a B&O tax, and big businesses can walk away and kind of smile and pocket the money while we're struggling to make ends meet because of our taxes or because of the bills we got to pay. None of us are billionaires. Billionaires can come here and make a fortune, and they'll pay federal tax, but they leave this alone. This is the place where they live, and like Sofia said, we're not asking them to bow at the feet of the Northwest people, but this is where they make their fortune. There's nothing wrong with paying their just due, and I think we should probably really look closely at an income tax.
As we discussed, since 2001, our local municipalities have been dependent on levies, sales taxes, and property taxes to get the resources that we need for the services we need in our communities. And we cannot continue to put that burden on the backs of our working families. We have got to stop. But realistically, I think it will take a while to get an income tax through the legislature. I too would support it, absolutely, but the realities of the body of the legislature make that a very challenging lift. I think a capital gains tax is also a very challenging lift, but one we are a lot closer to making happen. So I would definitely focus my energies on trying to pass a capital gains tax. It's very important to me. Again, as we've mentioned, all of these other issues we've really discussed are so resource dependent and revenue dependent, and we have got to provide better revenue options for all of our municipalities and our communities so they can follow through on the things that we mandate at the state level.
Very similar. So if you look at folks who make under $21,000 a year, they pay about 17% of their income in taxes. Folks who make over $500,000 a year, they pay about 2% in terms of their income taxes. Obviously, it's progressive. There's a few ways that you can look at it. Capital gains is obviously one of them. There's also about 664 tax exemptions on the books right now in Washington State. If you add up the value of all those exemptions, they add up more than the budget is actually worth. Income tax obviously will be very difficult. Even then, that ruling was done in 1930 during the Great Depression when the situation was very different. So the initiative that Shannon mentioned is I-747, the Tim Eyman initiative, that capped revenue at 1%. That has been more detrimental to our economy and to our state than most people even realize. Again, it is tough. It'll take bold leadership to finally get something passed, but we can't piecemeal legislation. We can't piecemeal revenue. We actually have to have a holistic, progressive tax reform.
All right, we can start with Shannon, I guess, and come back this way. The next question is about elections and voting. In order to obtain the required votes to pass the Washington Voting Rights Act of 2017, thank you, by the way, the right of local jurisdictions to use alternative voting methods was stripped out and put into a separate bill, SB 6402. 1. Are you familiar with alternative voting methods such as proportional representation using ranked choice voting and multi-member districts? And 2, do you support Senate Bill 6402, which allows a county, city, town, or district to 1. Eliminate the primary for a single or multiple position office within their jurisdiction, or 2. Use a proportional voting system for an office with multiple positions?
Thank you. So I am familiar with it. I would not at this time, knowing what I know, support it, because I do feel, frankly, it's really hard to get people to vote as it is. And I do believe that that complicates it in a way that I worry would actually deter some folks from participating. Now that said, I'm open to listening more about this one and being more educated about it if there are folks who could find a way to persuade me that it actually would indeed open the floor to more people and it would actually prevent them from participating due to the complication of it.
Well, the complication of any bill is something that the legislators have to be concerned about when they write the bill. To allow counties and districts to do the kind of things they need to do to get the votes and the people to participate, that's all we want. Not just we as candidates, but we as citizens. We all want to participate in our district. We all want to be part of the legislative process in our district. If not only, if just by casting a single vote. I think by complicating that and not giving people what they're used to, it might confuse people for the first 2 or 3 years or 2 or 3 sessions, because there's always a learning curve with everything that we do. And something that's important as voting and putting the people in that will help you that not only say the right things, but when they get there, they do the right things. I think we don't want to confuse anybody on those issues. I think we want to be clear on how we vote. And as Shannon said, it is tough to get people out to vote. A lot of times they've lost confidence in their candidates, and we don't want to cause them any more grief or any more pain. We want to make voting as simple and smooth as possible.
I also have I'll just say a pretty simple view of the proportional representation. There was a really good presentation here actually on the 34th, so I feel like I got a really good sort of primer. But I do agree that, at the heart of the matter, voters get really discouraged when their legislators aren't out there fighting for their values. And so I think I've seen in previous elections, when they see that they have leaders that step up, that they are promoting the values of Washington and not the federal administration and doing what's right, that's what gets people out there to vote. So I think while it is interesting to look at different systems, and maybe perhaps that might be something that we need to do in the future, the elected legislators have a really key role in making sure all the voters are engaged and get out there and use their vote.
So I don't know all the details about those strategies, so I'm not going to comment on those, but I am going to say I'm not sure that we in this room and we as registered voters and good Democrats do enough to get out the vote every year. I go through the community, I help register voters, I bring, ballots to different communities in different voter registration in different languages to make sure that everybody that wants to register to vote understands how to do that and can do that. I walk my precinct every single election. I think are we trying to fix a problem that we haven't done enough to solve with the resources that we have in this room and in our community to get people to vote? I've worked overseas a lot in my life, and people overseas cannot believe that we have access to voting and we don't exercise it.
Innovative solutions to get more representation, I would be supportive. If you look in Yakima, they had a redistricting of their city council to ensure that folks of Latinx and Hispanic communities were also represented on the council as well. I would support plans to help those types of issues here as well. The biggest thing for me is people don't turn out because they don't care. Oftentimes they're working 2 or 3 jobs. They feel that they're disconnected from the political process. When they look at the leadership, it doesn't reflect their communities or their values. There are things that we can do right now that doesn't require legislation to help folks get out the vote, to help folks get more engaged in the community as well. And honestly, it's going to rely on a lot of folks in this room to make that happen, just because it is tough to come out on a Wednesday night when it's sunny outside and you have 2 kids. So how do we engage folks in the communities that they're from? How do we make sure that we're culturally competent in terms of how we engage and outreach with them? And how about we knock on more doors than just 3 out of 4 and 4 out of 4? Let's actually meet with folks in Bureau White Center as well.
Shout out to King County Council for passing prepaid postage.
All right, let's start with Lem and go towards Shannon. The next question is about universal health care. Can you talk about the prospect of universal health care in Washington State? Is it possible?
Yeah, it is. I think it is very possible. There's a clause in Obamacare that a state can choose what works best for it and go that way. In a modern society and with all the technology that we have in our famous Pill Hill, nobody should go without health care here. There's enough money, there's enough brains, and there's enough talent to make sure that people who get sick and can't afford it should be able to go somewhere and get themselves taken care of. If you see someone, a homeless person on the street, and you see them that they're sick and they're coughing and their nose is running, I hope the thought runs through your mind is, can they afford medicine? What medicine can they afford? Do they have to suffer through colds, flu, gout, sore back? If they fall down and cut themselves, they're not going to get stitches. They're probably getting infected. In the society that we have, I think universal health care is a must. It should be the norm. It's something that we as decent human beings should always fight for, and we as future politicians should push for.
Yes, I absolutely believe that universal health care is possible. I do think, like many things, obviously, as we've seen, it takes a little while. But even the Affordable Care Act, which we all know was criticized 6 ways from Sunday when it came out, when in King County, the outreach work that we did, our ability to reach into communities, we had massive amounts of signups for the Affordable Care Act when people understood it, knew how to get to it, and what it meant for them for preventative measures. I think that's the other issue, obviously, that we need to continue to push on related to universal health care, is it saves money at the end of the day, because all of us know how expensive it is to go to the emergency room versus to take good care of yourself and get that preventative work done earlier as opposed to waiting until you're in an emergency situation. We just don't all have the opportunity to do it. So I would absolutely support any push for universal access. I support Medicare for all. And I think I'm excited to go to the state legislature and continue working on that issue.
I mean, Cody's here, so she'll probably be the best person to speak on this. But yeah, obviously healthcare for all is important. I think one of the most frustrating things that I see on a weekly basis is a friend who gets sick, and now they have a GoFundMe to help pay for the medical care. That is horrific in this country, where we are the most wealthy in the world to have that happen. There are 2 bills right now, one in the House and one in the Senate, to try to make this possible. Both are still in committee. One for waivers and one for a housing trust. It's going to be a very difficult process. It's going to be very hard. However, I would challenge folks to even think about beyond the scope of what we're thinking about now. Oregon and California are also blue walls. They have very strong Democratic leadership. If we can partner up with those states to somehow build our own Medicare system, we potentially could do it without having a waiver from the Trump administration, which I don't know.
I think universal health care is possible here in the state of Washington, and I believe that health care is a right. And I think that it's one of the things, and I go back to talking about not taking for granted, one of our many wins is that in the legislature, thanks to Eileen Cody, we've had a really long history of really looking at innovations and learning from other states. Before we had the Exchange and Affordable Care Act, the state was looking at the Massachusetts connector. The state created its own basic health plan to provide health care for low income. And then when the budget went south, found creative ways to use a federal waiver so that we can keep that program and keep people funded. So I think that that is the trajectory we've been. And if you elect a person that has the knowledge of where we've been and also a healthcare background, then it becomes that much more of a reality.
I agree. I think it's possible. I was working in public health when the Affordable Care Act passed, and we opened the doors to so many more people and gave them access to health care. We helped them sign up. We helped them understand their options. I work at Children's now. Can I just tell you, we have a $1 billion campaign going to fund uncompensated care. We shouldn't have to do that. We shouldn't ask everyone, in addition to everything we're paying elsewhere, to have to fund $1 million for uncompensated care at Children's. We do a great job of serving everybody that walks in the door and not sending them, not serving them because they can't pay. But we need to make that more universal through healthcare for all, so that nobody has to worry about that. Nobody has to worry about, should I go to the ER? Should I go here? Do I have a doctor? Do I know what to do? One system, universal for all. Let's get it done.
All right, the next set of questions will be about housing and homelessness, and we can start with Sofia and go the other direction. What is the state's responsibility to assist cities in managing homelessness?
I think that the state can have a lot of responsibility, actually, in assisting cities to address homelessness and affordable housing. So currently I'm on the board of the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance. And actually it's been a really huge learning curve because I really didn't have any background in housing, but I felt it was really important. Before my cousin left when he was deployed for the Navy, before he left, one of the things he told me was, all of this homelessness in Seattle and also the education system, he's like, I thought that's what we were running away from. Why is it here? And honestly, I don't understand why it even exists in our place of affluence. So I think the state has a lot of opportunities to go into partnership with cities to find those solutions that work for different localities.
The state has a responsibility to kill me. That's a quick way to do that, huh? Look, the state does have a responsibility. We don't need to play games with our own minds or with ourselves. Homelessness, to me, is disgusting. It's the moral dilemma of this generation. It's a poisoning of society, believe it or not. And the state should do everything it can and everything it should do for homeless people. They're not all lazy. They're not all bums. A lot of them are disabled. A lot of them have fallen on hard times. When a friend of mine and I used to go and feed the homeless ourselves on Christmas morning, we would pack groceries together and we'd go feed them. Some of the stories they would tell of how they got there are amazing. And as a preacher with a mouth full of words all the time, ready to preach, fire, tell them you need to do this and that. When they start telling you how they got there, it makes you it humbles you really, really quick. Because you can see yourself in that position if that should happen to you. And I think a state this big, with this many things going on, with all these big businesses coming in here, should do everything possible, for real, to end homelessness. They can do that.
I think the first thing we need to do is address tax reform, as we've all talked about quite often tonight. The
second thing I think we need to do is address some root causes, particularly as it relates to mental health issues. We've had some great, thank you Eileen Cody, for increasing compensation for some of our frontline workers, so people at Navos, and that we have more folks out there and staying in those jobs to help transition people. For example, people coming out of recovery, very often they come out of recovery and then within a month they are homeless again because we have not provided the transitional resources once they've come out of that situation. We also continue every year, we have to fight for the document recording fee so that we can continue to get funding into our local municipalities for our regional homeless plans and addressing our affordable housing plans, and we need to make sure we continue to do that work as well.
There's a lot for homelessness. I don't even know where to begin. So family homelessness also is a very important issue. When you look at it, there's about 8,000 young kids who are homeless right now in their families in the King County area. The leading cause of homelessness for families is domestic violence. Oftentimes when we think of homelessness, we see the folks on the streets, we see the folks underneath the bridges, and that is horrific itself, the fact that we live in Seattle. There's so many more folks who are on the verge of homelessness, who are also couch surfing, who are living in cars. It is much more cost effective to actually keep people from being homeless than it is to get them out of homelessness in the first place. So in terms of how we can help, everything from obviously mental health counseling, more affordable housing, including there's areas that we can develop as well, and being able to just, it's so tough. The misnomer about homelessness is that it's just, drug addiction, opioids, and mental health. There's so much more than that in Washington State as well. And I don't want that to be the only narrative about homelessness, because we have regular families that live here who are also homeless.
So I think the question about what the state can do, I've been debating this with my husband at home about, is it the state's responsibility to solve King County's problem with homelessness? But I do think the state funds the systems that provide services for substance abuse treatment, for trauma-informed care, for mental health treatment. And I think the last thing we want is somebody that's living on the streets and decides, I'm ready to go to treatment. And we have to tell them, there's not a bed, sorry, get in line. There's not a service available for you. I think it's a crime for kids to be living on the street. I visited families living in their van in the back parking lot of, outside the public health center. I went and looked for families underneath the bridges as a public health nurse. No families and kids should be on the street. That should be a first priority. But I really think bolstering those systems that are going to address, as Shannon talked about, the root causes, that's what the state can do for us, and then we need to get the systems working in King County to get those folks into care.
Okay, let's start with Shannon on the next one. This is another question about housing and homelessness. Senator Nelson has been a very strong supporter of improving tenants' rights as a key strategy in preventing homelessness. If you win, will you continue her legacy, and how so?
Yes, and I will certainly be sitting down with her to actually hear, and I think that's actually one of the great advantages when you can sit down with a sitting legislator and get that background on the folks who are, it's pretty obvious usually who the opposition to something is and who the supporters of something is. It's kind of harder to find those squishy middle people, right? And those are the people, especially with a slim majority like we have now, who you really need to hone in on and figure out how to get them to the right place to support that work. And so I would definitely work with Sharon before I started this job in an effort to continue that, and especially to build those coalitions in an effective way.
Yeah, I actually think we had some pretty good wins this past legislative session. So banning discrimination on source of income, not necessarily taking into account somebody's criminal background for tenants' rights as well. It's a tough issue, but yeah, I would definitely continue on with what Sharon is doing in terms of making sure that tenants' rights are on the forefront. Everything from being able to ensure that all folks have access to the housing that they deserve.
Well, we want to thank Sharon for her work. She cracked the first egg in this, and we got to make this omelet ourselves. And we'd have to talk to her to pick up where she left off. But the homeless situation, it may not go away overnight, but we're going to need more places for more places, people to live. By 2030, we're going to need 4.6 million more units. And that's going to take a lot of building, and that's going to be a lot of people coming in here to live. And it's going to be tough for them to find a place to live if we've got homeless all over the place, and it's not always their fault, as Joe did say. A lot of us ignore that because we don't suffer that. A lot of us are not, one paycheck away from being homeless. But sequence of cataclysmic events could send any of us over the edge at any time. With healthcare the way it is, insurance and costs, and insurance companies only paying so much. Homelessness is a serious problem. A place to live in this city is a serious problem. We've got to make it more affordable. We've got to make it more accessible. And we can't discriminate against anybody because of what they look like or what they sound like or who they are.
Yes, I would continue the legacy of supporting and empowering tenants and their rights. Again, that's a really important reason why you need to have a strong legislator, because while we are making a turn on so many important issues, it does take a lot of energy and intention to keep the momentum going and not go backwards. With tenants and landlords, there's just an imbalance of power. We did make some wins, but we have a long way to go. The housing market, as we talked about, is really precarious, that it's really easy from someone to have a home, to suddenly be in their car and be, frankly, invisible. So if for any reason why a tenant will need to move out, they need to be able to find that new space so they don't find themselves in that vulnerable place of homelessness.
So I was having a conversation with this young woman over there who could raise her hand. She just found out they're selling her apartment building, and where are you going to go? You've been living in an affordable building in, West Seattle, and suddenly they're selling. Where are you going to find a place to live? I hear this story every day from families at Children's, from coworkers that I work with who are being priced out of housing. We need to have better tenant rights in place so that there's somewhere for people to land, especially families and those folks on fixed incomes, because they don't have the flexibility that somebody that's working a $150,000 job have to go look for different housing. So I would continue that work, absolutely.
All right, you can hang on to the mic and we'll just go back the other direction. What is the state's responsibility in helping cities and localities address the housing crisis?
Well, that's a good question. I think some of it is around revenue, right, to address the housing crisis. I'm worried about how long it takes for housing to come online. So we're passing revenue sources right now at the local level that are going to build affordable housing, but it's going to be 5 to 7 to 10 years before some of those houses get built. And where are people going to go in the meantime? I'm not sure. I won't delve into the state's role because I probably wouldn't speak eloquently about it tonight. But I think there is the opportunity for a partnership, and whatever we can do together would be progress.
The state's responsibility, I think, can include a number of things. There is the capital budget, so there is some funding that may be available to build affordable housing in different localities. As we talked before, the rights of others, make sure they're protected so that there aren't laws and barriers for people to keeping safe homes or having them vulnerable to losing their homes. And also, we need to look at things comprehensively in that there are also related and root causes to homelessness. So, for example, poverty is another one that the state can help with. And I just saw that there was a report, actually, that there was a really strong correlation between those who are benefiting from our Medicaid program and those also in public housing. So if we can take a look at that population and pass some policies so that we can reach and solve these two related issues, the state definitely has an opportunity to do that.
Well, one of the things the state probably could do is go ahead and increase the housing trust fund. To get affordable housing is one thing, and to get a lot of folks in affordable housing is a great thing. But the state owes some kind of responsibility. We're not just out of the nowhere without just support. Seattle can take care of itself to a certain degree, but the state has a certain responsibility to us as well. And when you make housing affordable for everybody, you got to make it safe for everybody as well. You just can't have a whole lot of people living together and doing whatever they think they can do and just kind of winging it. We don't want to wing it here in this state. We have people that are able to think. We got people that are able to strategize. And increasing the housing trust fund is just one of those ways to do things.
I think I covered a few of those items in my last answer. I think the other thing I would talk about, which is a little bit, I mean, maybe not wonky, but specific, is that there are a lot of things that are very complex about what we have to do with our surplus properties, both at the county level, other local municipalities, and at the state level. So a lot of times people will see an empty piece of land and think, you know, that's a great place to build a housing complex, and it might be. But there are all these sort of arcane pieces that could be tied to it for any number of reasons. So I also think a good sweep of sort of what some of those regulations are and what is impeding us from being able to move forward and use some of our surplus lands would be another good thing that the state could actually step in with and partner with some of our municipalities as well.
I think there's a few things even not necessarily related to housing. So people are being displaced right now. They're being pushed away further from their jobs. So mass transit, investing in that right now can actually alleviate some issues with affordability. In terms of partnering with local municipalities, right now, cities and local municipalities take most of the burden when it comes to affordable housing. Obviously, the state can do a lot more when it comes to that as well. If you look at specifically in the 34th District, in between White Center and West Seattle, there's an area on 1st Avenue South, near where the Burning Boys used to be, largely underdeveloped. We could potentially use state and local funds to build out work-first housing that can probably fit 100 to 150,000 people in those areas as well. So tangibly, you can use a capital budget plus local infrastructure to build housing that won't displace people, that has parking, and be able to use mass transit to support those areas as well.
Got it. There's a follow-up question I would love to ask, but we have so many questions on this page. The next set of questions is about guns and safety. Joe, you can hang on to the mic. What is the state's responsibility to ensure school safety? And are resource officers in schools the best way to ensure that safety?
When you say resource officers, you mean more people with guns? Or just resource officers? I would say less guns in school, period. But no, there's certainly things that we can do from the state level in terms of regulation as well. So mass shootings get the most amount of attention when it comes to gun violence, yet most of it is actually suicides and domestic violence issues. So 700 people in Washington State last year died due to gun violence. There are common sense things that we can do in terms of removing guns for folks who have a history of domestic violence or mental health issues or abuse. We can also do things like more strict laws in terms of how do you lock and carry your guns. Even concealed carry permits, we can potentially look at those as well in terms of is that actually effective. So I don't know if I'm answering the question, but there's a whole host of things that we can do that are on the docket that we can for sure use to reduce gun violence. And if you're a hunter and you love the Second Amendment rights, that's fine. Nobody's taking your guns away. But there are things that we can do right now that would help alleviate the gun violence issues that are affecting us today.
So no, I don't think school resource officers are the only answer to, or the answer at all to preventing gun violence. I think if, social workers and resource officers in that capacity in our schools is fantastic to help create a culture that can contribute to reducing gun violence, but really it's gun safety and prevention. And so again, I think the initiative that we're seeing come forward from the Alliance, I would work hard to see that initiative get passed, but then it will require a lot of implementation at the state level. It'll require us to be able to do the background checks, to work with our Department of Licensing folks, to follow up on making sure that people have maintained their status as being able to own a weapon. I think suicide prevention is a key. We've got to provide more resources to our schools to help address those issues and to help demonstrate, to show where signs are. Our health resource clinics in our schools are actually a great place to start addressing some of those issues at those levels in our high schools in particular.
So having a resource officer in school is fantastic, but a week or so ago we went through something really scary, my wife and I. And I was just blasted through the West Seattle blog one morning here last week, a week or so ago, and found out that West Seattle's Madison Middle School was on lockdown. And my wife didn't know about it, and I didn't know about it until that moment. And then my youngest son, texted her and said, "Mom, we're on lockdown." And we all know gun violence and mass shootings are something that terrorize you. But when your child texts you and says, hey, Mom, Dad, we're locked in our classroom because somebody threatened to shoot the school up, and that's all the information you get, that's my baby boy, okay? And I don't care how corny it sounds, your mind and your heart goes everywhere and nowhere at the same time. You don't know what to think, you don't know what to say. If you're at work, you're going to get to where you need to be. We have to do everything reasonably possible, and sometimes unreasonably possible, to keep our schools safe. More gun laws, more restrictions on those guns, better background checks, that stuff will work. We need to implement it now.
I think it's really sad that when I grew up, the drill that I had to deal with earthquake drills. And now today we're talking about lockdown drills, which my stepdaughter has to deal with regularly. And I'm actually proud of her for walking out and demonstrating with her classmates. When my mother, before she passed away, she actually told me that she owned a gun but couldn't remember where it was. And so when we, as the family, went and were putting together her belongings in the house, one gun fell out of a suitcase, and luckily it didn't discharge. My toddler niece found a rifle behind the dresser. And luckily her father got to it before. And another one was hidden under a bed when we were trying to pack up those things. So, guns are just a high-risk safety measure. And the nurses have also always worked with pediatricians actually to pass gun safety legislation. And we can do so much more with guns to prevent gun violence and death.
I think school resource officers do a great job. We do the school resource officer at Evergreen High and worked to quell a lot of challenges that were happening. But I think the answer is we need guns out of the hands of people who, no 16-year-old needs a gun. I'm sorry. If you're a hunter, you can have a rifle locked up, that's fine. But no 16-year-old needs a gun. No 18-year-old needs an assault rifle. Those should be banned right out. We should have a safe storage campaign. King County already has it. It's called Lock It Up. That's a result of what we see in child death review. The kids that we saw that got a hold of guns, many of them found them in their bed, next to the bed of their parents. They knew where their parents kept the guns. They knew where their parents kept the key to the safe to get into the guns. So better storage, holding those gun owners accountable, whose guns are accessible to folks who are going out and using them in school shootings, that's really important. So I think we just got to get the guns away from, we got to get rid of them.
All right, I'm going to skip the next question on guns and move on in the interest of time. This next question is yes or no. Is McCleary settled?
No.
Is McCleary settled?
No.
No.
No, but I think,
No.
yeah, no, the answer is no.
I'll just say no, you don't have to ask.
All right, you can hang on to the mic. State school levies go to the general fund to be distributed to school districts. Local levies, however, can only be used in the district where they are collected. As a result, wealthy communities tend to pass school levies that support enhanced services. Levy requests in lower income neighborhoods are often smaller and or voted down. Under our current regressive tax system, there is an over-reliance on levies to provide any services over the very basic. What are your thoughts on addressing inequalities in state and local funding and educational opportunities?
So as a person who grew up in the Highline School District, where I myself was impacted by those situations, it's important for the state to fully fund education. And I'm going to say it again, is even funding the clearly is not enough in terms of compensating teachers a fair wage, giving them the resources they actually need to provide the resources to close the achievement gaps. So the state has to have a fix in terms of our regressive tax structure that can then distribute wealth evenly, or at least equitably, for various communities. Right now, having to do everything from the district level for a levy is completely unfair. Depending on where you live, or where your area code is, or where your zip code is, literally will determine your outcome for education, and that is not okay.
The reason I got involved with the 34th District Democrats in the first place was actually around the issue of education, because my 3 children are all growing up here in West Seattle and going to our public schools, and I saw exactly what it meant for other kids who didn't have the same opportunities that my kids had. I had a friend who couldn't afford to put her child into preschool, so her child started behind in kindergarten, and then once that child started behind, it was harder for that school to deal with the resources they had to use in that particular case. I saw what it meant for the difference between even the building, the capital, and the infrastructure, so the environment that teachers are in when they are teaching every day, depending on the kind of neighborhood that they lived in. And that's not the kind of communities I want my kids to grow up in. I want my kids to grow up in a place where all kids have the opportunities to get a basic public education. It absolutely is a right that all of our kids have, and I think we have got to really work on the funding, full funding, not just the McCleary funding.
Well, we know the state has all kind of responsibilities. We know that they should be doing things that they need to do. There's a $600 million tax exemption for corporations. Some of that money should go to the state for children, for schools. And it's obvious to see that if you live down on Alki Beach and there's private schools or good schools down there, and somebody in White Center or somewhere where doesn't have any money, if they have to depend on those levies in different parts of the city, it's wrong. We're intelligent people. We're supposed to act like we're intelligent people. If a poor community can't afford to educate those children, what happens to those children when they're 16, 17, 18? They're becoming disenfranchised before they get out of high school. And what kind of citizens are they going to be? We can make those things change, or we can make them stay the same. When we see something that's obviously wrong, especially the folks in this room, it's obvious you care about this community because you're here tonight. And you don't have to be here. But people like you and people like us, we can make a change, and we should do that. There's no reason we shouldn't.
So my sister and I, when we grew up, we felt kind of second-class citizens to our cousins because we were the only two kids that went to public school, and all of our other cousins got to go to private school. But for a long time, we got bragging rights because we were the only ones to go to college and also get advanced degrees. But so what worries me now is that I'm not really sure that other kids now have that opportunity that we have. And I think it's really key that we have a strong K-12 system so that kids do have the skills and the preparation to go where they want to go. And one of the wonderful opportunities at the state legislature also is to keep a pulse on those programs so that they can support education and have it evolve, so that the kids have the opportunities to take part of the workforce that we need today. And that also includes equity for all kids. And I'm really proud to be working with some state institutions to make sure that we have data to track where the achievement gaps are so that we can really target those populations.
So this is an issue near and dear to my heart. I was the chair for the Highline Citizens for Schools that ran the bond and levy campaigns for 10 years when my kids were in school. And the fact that we had to prepare layoff notices for teachers every time there was a levy on the ballot to get ready in case the levy didn't pass and we lose 25% of our teachers, that's not okay. I also remember the 50-page report we studied that Highline was at the perfect storm of the way our taxes were structured and our levy lids, et cetera, that we were one of the most challenged school districts in the state to get that funding into the classrooms. I think, I volunteered in the classrooms. If teachers don't have the hardest job in the world, I don't know what it is, and we shouldn't have to call on them, and that's what we did. The teachers did the heavy lifts for the levy. We had to call on them, and they had to make phone calls. They should be able to be in the classroom doing their job as educators because that's what they're so good at.
All right, we've come to the end of our time, so I'll give you each 1 minute for closing remarks. I'd like to thank you all for stepping up to run, particularly at this time in our history. There is no higher calling than public service, and it's never been more needed than it is today. So thank you all, and please make your closing remarks.
First of all, I just want to again say thank you so much for taking the time out today and spending a nice Wednesday afternoon or night with us, and being able to hear us out. I think showing up is the first important step in terms of making sure that your voice is heard, and that's why representation matters. So I'm running because I want to make sure that all the voices in the 34th and Washington State are heard, regardless of your income, regardless of your background. And again, just appreciate the time. Really glad to be here. Hope you guys have a good night.
Yes, thank you all very much for being here. As I said, I'm proud to be a Democrat. I'm proud to be running for state senator for the 34th district. You heard a lot of us talking tonight about all of the things we want to do, and I know that it's not just what we want to do, it's how we get in there, we execute the strategy, and we effectively do the things that need to be done for our progressive values. And I really want to take all of my experience as a public servant, my experience as a working mother, my experience working with nonprofits, and my experience here in the 34th District Democrats. I want to work with you and on your behalf at the State Senate, and I would very much appreciate your support. Thank you.
We've come to the end of this for now. I would like to thank my colleagues. I can't call them opponents because they're all excellent people. They all care just like they need to care. But I would like to take the experience that I've had as a U.S. Marine, as a father, as a minister, as a pastor, as a person who fed the homeless, someone who worked on the Employees Community Fund, and take that on a state level, and be able to apply some of those things that we did on a macro level or micro level to a macro level, and be able to make this place a lot better, not just for all of us in this room, but down the road for my grandchildren, if I should ever see them, to give them a better place to live and to know that, you know, Grandpa had something to do with it. Thank you.
Again, I also want to say thank you, and we've heard a lot of the complex issues that are out there, which I'm sure you're going to go home thinking, you know, we really need somebody who can handle such a variety and complex of issues. But the beauty of being in such a progressive district is that you can, whoever you elect can take a really hard stand, a very clear stand on the most controversial issues, and other districts don't have that luxury. So I hope to bring my experience in Olympia as an advocate on issues that were forward moving, like the Affordable Care Act, as well as knowing now that I've been away and watching what's been happening on the federal and the state level, to also never take for granted the progress we made and really stand our ground on the things that are really important and enduring, such as education, maintaining opportunity for everyone, because that is what people look to in Washington State, and I want to help do that.
So I'll echo the thanks for everybody that gave up on Wednesday evening to hear from us. You know, I've been a PCO, I've been walking my precinct, I've been running bond and levy campaigns, I've been working in my kids' classrooms, I've been at public health working on the ground to support children and families and build systems that work better for them. And I want to take all of that experience and take it to the next level and make change at the state level in Olympia. And I think all of those experiences combined have given me the perspective, the knowledge, and the skill to do that work in Olympia. And that's why I want to go.
Thank you again to all of you. You survived your very first